There's a timer, Brian. This is legit. Okay,
Nice.
so here we are. This is episode 2 of the Footwear Intern podcast. Here with the beautiful, the amazing Brian Rottman. Um, and I guess just to start off, um, episode number 2. We're having fun. The purpose of this podcast is to share stories, share people's entrance into the footwear industry, any tips or wisdom that you'd like to share with the people. Brian as the guest and as the we're calling this the Brian Rottman experience.
Scary.
But if you're at home listening, this is how Brian got into the footwear industry, and we're gonna talk through it and kind of see where we get. But Brian, I guess just to intro you first off, we're good friends. We went to the University of Oregon together, also like Emily in episode 1. Got a little bit of a theme there. When you're starting a podcast, you got to pull your friends in first, right?
That's right.
But Brian, so far in your career post the University of Oregon, I guess even prior to the University of Oregon, you studied kinesiology, and I'll let you go into a little bit of your path. We're gonna dive deep into who you are first, but then we go to the University of Oregon, have an excellent time for 2 years, and then you start your career off with Crocs, and now you're at Nike. So that's where you're at right now. But just to like break the ice, let the people know who you are, who we're dealing with today. Like, tell me a little bit about your background. Like, what right now we know you're sitting in the Nike chair, but like what got you there? Like what made you excited about footwear?
Yeah.
Let's hear a little bit about it.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me first. I feel like following up the Emily Guerra is, a challenge in itself because I think the world of her and yourself and others that, we went to school with. So, but yeah, I guess a little bit about me. I feel like, you even the intro was very fitting, talking about storytelling and telling stories. I think that's like the biggest part of what we do. So, a little of my story, I guess. I grew up in Western Michigan. Small town vibes, which was, lovely. Very thankful for, a lovely childhood. Grew up playing a lot of team sports and being outside pretty frequently. West Michigan is beautiful. Don't tell anyone. Don't spoil it for anybody. We
No,
don't want everybody to flock there. Only if they want to visit. It's really fun. But yeah, I grew up playing a lot of team sports. Getting outside with both my sisters very frequently, and that was a great way to grow up and be active. And yeah, I grew up loving art class. That was like my favorite class of all time. Like every day when there was like a little hour where you got to throw on your dad's old dress shirt and paint or throw things together. That was my jam. And I think yeah, growing up there, I definitely had more of the disposition of that art wasn't really a job, and that people went to college to be a nurse or a doctor or an engineer. And so, not that I was ever told like that's what you have to do. I just kind of thought like, oh, that's like what people go to college for, is to do stuff like that, and it's very practical, which I have so much respect for. And actually, most of my family is in healthcare or something very important to society like that, which I think the world of. But as you alluded to, I went to a small college in Southern California called Azusa Pacific. So shout out APU, go Cougs. And yeah, like you said, I studied kinesiology because I had this affinity for sports and exercise and fitness, and I thought that seemed like a kind of a fun entry to like more of a hands-on, more active type of healthcare. But similarly, at the same time, I was studying graphic design, just kind of as more of a side thing. It was a minor at first, but then I ended up taking the equivalent of like the major requirements for those courses. So I think that's like deep down, that's where my heart was at. I was like, oh man, like I'd love this, science is cool, but like I really love these design courses. And I think I've told you, like I was definitely on the track for like physical therapy or like athletic training, and just I think just kind of be close to sport. but then once I was a senior in college, I was doing, an internship, or volunteer internship experience at a local sports clinic, which was, rewarding in its own way. But I think I had come back a couple of times and I was like, this is like not what I thought it was. And it's not as fun. And, am I really about to commit like however many years of my life going forward to this and a lot of money?
Yeah.
And so, I think as a lot of people do, had a little bit of an existential crisis in my early 20s, 21, 22, which honestly I would say is probably the best thing for me. I think I'm glad I had it at that moment, maybe not when I was further down the line in a job that I was like, oh no. But yeah, I kind of realized maybe that wasn't what I was most passionate about. And I'll never forget, I had one day I was in class, in one of my classes, on my computer, not paying attention, but like Googling other things I could do with my life. And I think I Googled like cool sports plus design jobs, things like that.
Say, like, we need to know what your
Yeah.
Google search was.
Yeah. And so one of the first things that came up was an ad for University of Oregon had started this, at the time it was very new, like Masters of Product Design or Sport Product Design. And I was like, oh, that sounds really rad. And, in my head, I'd known, being a pretty avid sports fan, that like U of O is pretty connected with Nike and, the industry. I knew like some of the things were up in Portland. And so anyway, was in the rabbit hole whilst in class and requested information from, whatever, lovely administrative person had their email on there. Anyways, to make a long story short, got this packet of information about the application process, which, required a portfolio, which I was like, what's a portfolio?
Yeah.
But anyways, long story short, I spent the next like 6 to 8 months trying to kind of retrofit some sort of science and research projects that I had done based in sport, for kinesiology, as well as some kind of sport-based graphic design projects I had done out of, just hobby. A lot of them were jersey designs and like kind of graphic designs, implemented into like sports settings. I tried to kind of marry those things and show that like, hey, I have like a unique, background, which thankfully, as I'm sure you remember, like there wasn't really like a prerequisite degree like requirement for our program. I mean, there was like have a bachelor's degree, I think, but like it wasn't like it has to be industrial design or this or that. So anyway, somehow got in. I mean, that portfolio was rough. It was rough, but somehow got in. That's where I met you, and that's a little bit of the story. Is like where I feel like I felt definitely my compass was in the right place. I was like, this is something I'm really excited about pursuing and seeing what could be there, and I slowly uncovered more about what the industry is. When I met you and others, and that's kind of the story of how I got interested in footwear, at least on the pathway to getting a job. So
okay, and I guess at this point you're in your kinesiology class, you're looking up design and sports. Like, had you met anyone, or even had had you ever met anybody that was like working in physical product design? Because I know you already said you had like your interest in graphic design, but did anything tip you off there, or what was like, where did you think like, how can I marry like sport and design?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think I've like kind of two things I guess I would answer that with. I think initially, like, I guess I forgot to mention, I grew up playing soccer. That was like my sport since I could walk till I was 18. Like I played quite frequently, like pretty much year round once I was able to join like a competitive league. And so that was a big part of my life. And I think when I was like 12 or 13, I joined this club team. And one of the teammates of mine had on the new Mercurial Vapors, which were like what Cristiano Ronaldo was wearing on the pitch. And I was like, those are sweet. Yeah. And I remember being 12 years old. I was like, oh man, like if I could like choose a job like to like work, I was like obsessed with these cleats. It was like I would watch people unbox them on YouTube and talk about the different materials and like the feel of the ball and how they broke them in, like wearing them in the shower or something. And so I remember when I was that age, I was like, if like my dream job would be like making the Mercurial, like, or working on it, because I used to see some of the behind the scenes. Yeah, it was just funny. It was one of those things I think in soccer too, you're like naturally predisposed to be like looking at feet more often, because that's like where all the game is played. So that's kind of, I think that was more subconscious, like, oh, this is really cool. Someone had to do it as a job, but I never really thought like, oh, that could be me.
Yeah.
Um, but then to answer your question, I did not know anyone that did this as a job. And like, I think, especially in the Midwest where I'm from, like, that's just very foreign. It's like you're in, that's like in Oz, somebody else does that.
Right.
And, we go to Dick's Sporting Goods and buy the shoes. So I really didn't know anyone. I will say I remember when I kind of around this time when I discovered this program and kind of realized, oh, that is like a whole industry that exists. One of my sort of friends, mentors from college, he had worked at the college I went to. I know he had taken a job at Nike, and he is super kind. And his name is actually Phil, ironically.
Nice. That's a good name for Nike.
Yeah, yeah. And so I remember one of my friends was like, just give him a call, like get his phone number and like call him and talk to him. And I also remember that was like right around the time when I had discovered the program. I remember I was on a phone call with Phil, and I was like, hey, like I'm kind of interested in this program. Like, is this doable? Like, I'm clearly there are jobs like this. And I remember he told me, it's like there are hundreds of people who do this as a job. Obviously at Nike, it's a large, probably the largest group of people that do that. But he was like, oh yeah, this is totally a thing. And like, he connected me with some people that had gone to our college as well who worked at Nike in various capacities. Ironically, one of whom actually interviewed me for the job I now have.
Nice.
But yeah, so to answer your question, just a long way to roundabout answer of like, I really didn't know anyone. And I think that leads to, something I'll probably share a little more later. I think reaching out to people and like the connections and like the networking is like critical, I would say, to this field. So
well, that's 100%. That's pretty crazy though, that one of the very first people that you networked with, like years before applying for this position, is who interviewed you. Like that.
Yeah.
If there's any better testament to like networking helps, I don't think there is. I think that's the best one. That's great. Okay,
sure.
well then you answered my other question of when was like your first shoe moment, like so that's really interesting. With soccer, did that like bleed into like what you were wearing every day, or like the shoes that you were
it's funny. I'm sure my mom would tease me and tell you that I've been obsessed with shoes and what shoes I was wearing since I could pick my own out at like the age of 9 or 10, because that was like a big thing, at least for my childhood, was like we'd only get new tennis shoes or like sneakers like once a year because your feet were growing so rapidly. I'm sure you can probably start to attest to this as a dad. Like kids' feet grow really fast, so I do remember like that was like definitely a avenue of like expression for me. Like I wanted to have like what I thought to be cool shoes, which is kind of funny, I mean, and it's funny that too, like nowadays, like it's almost this like really cool thing. Like, kids are wearing crazy dunks and, having crazy outfits. But like when we were, growing up, that was like not a thing.
For sure.
And I definitely like, I have a kind of funny story. Like I remember being kind of teased a little bit because I would like wash my shoes like with my old toothbrush and stuff because I wanted them to look nice and like new. And I have kids would be like, "What are you doing? Like, why are you keeping your shoes clean? Like, let's just go play." And I'm like, they have to look nice." So yeah, the soccer one was definitely like I think the first moment like I realized like, oh, like I find this really interesting. But there was also a moment I remember one of my friends in middle school got on the school bus and he had the new Carmelo Anthony Air Jordans that he had gotten for basketball season, and he showed me those, and I remember seeing those and being like, those are really cool. And then similarly, like I think it was even the following season I played basketball in middle school, not well, but it was when one of the first LeBron Zoom like shoes had come out, and it had kind of this like zigzag Velcro system over top of the laces that like everyone was wearing, and I thought those were super cool. So there was a couple moments like in my like early adolescence / like childhood where I was like started to notice those things a little more. But again, I think was so unaware that like that's someone's job. I mean, obviously someone had to do it, but you never really think about that. I didn't, at least as a kid.
I didn't think about that until I was like an adult. or
Yeah.
I guess like legally an adult, but it's like I think I was like 22 or
Yeah.
something. That like just even just like acknowledging the fact that someone's job was to make something. You know, like I
Right.
guess outside of like what you would see in like a carpenter shop or something. You know. But,
Yeah, totally.
Um, interesting. So, uh, so we get the background. You're leaving kinesiology. Is there any like, obviously like you talked about? I actually in a similar scenario, you made it a little further than I did. But I loved sports. I had a neighbor growing up that was a physical therapist, and he seemed to at least make a lot of money. And I was like, okay, if I don't make it to the NFL, then I could be a physical therapist. And I don't know how well you know my football career, but I didn't get close to the NFL.
I mean, I know John Elway made a couple calls to try to make that happen for you, Doug, but
I turned him down. Anyways, I wanted to save my brain, so
yeah, wise.
But I was like, okay, I'll be like, it was a pre-med, but it was like something to get into physical therapy too. I think it was exercise science. It was like my first program, but I failed
it's very similar.
two chemistry courses. I failed the first one, and I was like, oh, I'll retake it. Like I'll learn more. I took the second class that I guess you didn't have to pass the first one to take the second one. But I took the second one, and I was like, I'm going to get a good grade here, and I'll go back and retake the first one. And I'm pretty sure I either failed it or I got like a D minus. But I was like, okay, this is not my route. But yeah, so that's cool. I guess I can sympathize there with some of that. But so did you have any, like when you made the decision to shift from what you had studied, or at least like you focused more on in your undergrad to design, was that like a scary thing, just like pure excitement? Was it like feed us the feelings of Brian Rottman at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, I had like this moment, like that moment I mentioned where I was in class and I discovered the program. I was like so interested. I was like, I kind of looked at it in my head. I was like, I know this PT route is like one where I will always have a job and I will have the security of, like you mentioned, like financial security, but I'm not as passionate about it. And I'd found this lane of product design, at least this program that I'd hoped would, kind of put me on that path, that I was much more excited about. Like, oh man, like I think I'd be very fulfilled and, stimulated doing a job like that. I think that's more of what I'm excited about. However, like once I'd found it, I had to apply, and there was this uncertainty of like, well, if that could even happen or not, right? Because from my perspective, I was like, well, I'm not an industrial design student. I don't have this really cool portfolio. Like I haven't taken a sketching or drawing class since high school, and as you know, and as a spoiler alert for people, it's incredibly competitive to get into something like this. So there was probably like a 6 to 8 month period after I had found, this program, and the application deadline, there was in the summer, I believe. So I had like the 6 to 8 month period where I was like, okay, I had finished school and I was moving back home with my parents, and I was like, well, this might not happen. So I need to kind of figure out. And so I was working another job, actually. I was working as a graphic designer for this really small, like crisis prevention firm, which is just this local little group of guys who were trying to, they work with local schools and things. Maybe it was very, office vibes, very like make headers and like PowerPoints all day kind of thing. So there was a time where like I didn't know if it would happen or not, to be quite honest. Like, and so I think the shift came when I, obviously I was really passionate. I put in a ton of work to make my portfolio look as good as it could at the time, which again was not good. But there was a time, I was like, this might not happen. And I think the moment for me was when well, obviously then COVID happened. That was another big, elephant in the room. Like there was a lot of weird stuff happening just on the planet. But I was let go from that.
Kind of a wild time.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird. We didn't know what was going on, right? So there's all this personal uncertainty of mine and the kind of this global uncertainty of what was happening. But yeah, I actually got let go from that job because of COVID. They had to cut numbers, and then about a month or two later, I think I was accepted into the program, which was super exciting to me because I was like very much like, okay, well, I can't even have a job now. Like, I don't even have a job. And so thankfully that happened, and at that point I was all in. I was like, oh, this is like, no matter what, like I'm going, because I don't know if you remember, they sent us a message as well. I think after the pandemic started, like you can defer your acceptance, or you can defer your application. You may not get accepted in their previous or in the following cohort because they were hoping to have more students. But I was like, no, this is my chance. Like somehow they let me in with that crappy portfolio. So at that point, it was when I knew. I was like, I'm going for it. And I think the last thing I'll say is kind of making that sort of philosophical decision of like, I'm going to chase this.
Yeah.
Was when that happened. I was like, I had the hope of getting to that point when I applied. And once I was accepted, I was like, I'm all in. I'm going to chase it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I'm going to go for it. So.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, it was such a weird time to be alive.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can see now you made the most of it. I often get people just like asking me about my experience getting a master's in sports product design from the University of Oregon. I'd love to so that's the next step in your like career arc, right? You made the decision. Mm-hmm. COVID's hit. If you can, you coming from the Midwest, me coming from Salt Lake City, like at the time, like we're in the midst of COVID. There were like some big fires in the
That's
Oregon
right.
area, and obviously like protests and everything. And I feel like at least, and I guess maybe this is prior to, I want to hear about your experience, but so many people around me were like, what are you, like, why are you moving to Oregon?
Yeah.
Specifically Portland. Did you get any of the same, like, questions? Or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and I will just say, I think Portland kind of has a reputation of being a very creative place, but also a very odd place, and kind of,
Sure.
especially maybe, in circles where we grew up, I think there's this perception that, like, Portland is just this very weird place where anything goes.
Keep Portland weird, man. That's what we're
and I think in a beautiful way, the city does have that like mantra. Like they adopt, it is very welcoming, and if you have an interest, there's something for you here. But I definitely had that sentiment from folks back home, which I never took too seriously. Like to me, like I said, once I made that philosophical decision, I was like, I don't care what my uncle says about Portland. Like I'm going.
For sure. So, honestly, like I'll never forget, like the day we drove in from Utah to Oregon, it was like the most like clear skies, like beautiful day. It's like supposed to be like Portland's on fire, or it's like gloomy and rainy or something like that.
Yeah.
Like you talked about today, like you've got a sunny day today.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I love my experience in Oregon, but it was just so funny there was so much angst from other people around moving there, and just the times in general. But
I feel like most people who have the strongest opinions, I will just say, have probably not visited, and if they have, it was like 20 years ago. Right. So take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Okay, so hit me with like what was your experience with the program at the University of Oregon?
Yeah, I guess to put it shortly, like it was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was incredibly challenging in a lot of healthy ways. Some ways that I think maybe were a little difficult, maybe a little bit extra difficult. That didn't have to be that way, but overall, like I'm incredibly thankful for the experience that we had. It was, to kind of get a little bit into it. Coming from my background educationally, I did not have a product design experience, so much of what we were, tossed kind of in the deep end of was like, you're going to like ideate, design, and like create products like by hand, which I think was an incredibly valuable experience, but also one that like takes a lot of expertise to do well. And so for me, like I remember, like I think one of our first assignments was we had to get this sewing machine, and then we made a fabric little stuffed animal monster and things like that. And I remember actually, I think one of our first assignments, that I don't know if you remember, was we had to record ourselves threading our sewing machine. And
I don't remember that.
yeah, we had to like take a video of like knowing that we could like thread it. And I remember like I had never sewn a stitch in my entire life until getting to this part. And my hands were shaking. I probably set up my phone, and it took me probably 2 minutes to like figure out how to do this with all the arrows. And so, yeah, but I think that's very emblematic, at least for my experience. I was like, man, there was a lot of things I had never done in school. I never thought like I would be doing in a school setting. Yeah. That now was like, not only are like, you're going to have to do this, like, you better learn it pretty well, because like it's going to show if you don't know how to do this in your projects.
Can I interject one funny story, just because I don't remember that sewing, but do you remember our first quiz? And I think it was in that same like sewing class. I can't remember if this was like literally day one, week one, or maybe it was like week two. But this, and I don't think this is like I think this is just a funny story. But and if we need to edit it out afterwards, but we get into our master's program. Obviously, like we just said, we're in this like world of COVID. Everything's so weird. We get to school, and the first semester was it was like hybrid, but the professors were online.
It was like 85% hybrid, and then we'd go in studio to do like these very introductory level, like making things, right? Yeah.
But we were in that like intro sewing class. Our professor never came in during the semester, if I remember right. And so we had, and I can't even think of like what the information would have been that we were being quizzed on, but we had a quiz, and our professor's remote, but we're all in the same room or whatever, or we're actually mixed in two rooms. But in my brain, we started this class, we get this quiz, and it was like, okay, well, we're all in the same room, and everyone was like, well, should we just do this collaboratively? And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's super smart. Like, that's great. We're in a master's program, we're working together. It's like industry, you know? And I can't remember whose idea it was, but it was like everyone in the class was like working on it. And I honestly, Brian, I didn't even think twice about it. But then, and kind of like debated on some questions, but we ended up like blatantly getting some questions wrong as like a class. I don't know if you remember this.
Oh, I remember.
And then the professor was like, you all cheated. And it was like really, really hardcore. And I guess I just thought we were working together and it was allowed. And I don't know if that's what everyone thought, but it was just like I just remember like the professor being so upset, like we were all gonna get kicked out of the program or something like that. It was like,
it was like half the cohort. They're like, well,
yeah.
But it was one of those things where it was like, all that weird. We don't really know how school looks in
it was
this
just
time.
A weird time.
And like you said, there were no instructors there, but like, I think someone came in like after the fact to like, scold everyone and like tell us all how serious this was. And it was like an 8-question quiz. So yeah, I do remember that.
The dumbest thing ever, but we were all about to like, or at least half the group was going to get kicked out of school because of it.
And the questions were like about stitch length and like needle tension, or like very like weird things about sewing machines and whatever.
Nothing that you're currently thinking about in your daily job.
No.
Anyways, we can continue.
Yeah, that's funny.
Continue to tell me about your experience.
Yeah. I think it was incredibly unique from every educational experience I had ever had. I don't know about yourself, but like for me, like I, obviously in college studied mainly science, like science in the sense of like I was taking anatomy and physiology classes. I also took chemistry and did not do great, and I really don't like chemistry. And like I was taking like physics classes and, nutrition and like exercise prescription and things like that. So to come in from that kind of, for the most part, in my major courses, I had graphic stuff, but like to come in from that and then go into like 3D modeling things and, sewing and like making patterns. And it was just incredibly different. And so, I mean, for me, that was like the biggest challenge I felt. And I think honestly, part of the the beauty of the program is that everyone has like such unique backgrounds, or like in our core, everybody had such a unique background. So while I may have had, knowledge that other people didn't have as far as like how the actual like human foot is built and like, joints and, how, a runner's gait influences their performance and things like that. Like I had not the first clue about how to do any of the more hands-on prototyping and designing that, is so critical. So, it was a big learning curve, and but again, I think one that like was definitely driven by that like fire of like, I think I want to do this, and like I want to, bring those skills up to like the level that of the knowledge that I think I have of, how an athlete, performs and like what they are looking for. So yeah, I think the first year, and it was a 2-year program to maybe kind of clarify for people, like it was a 2-year program. And I would say the first year was a lot of kind of more broad design principles for product design, as well as a couple of introductory classes in business and marketing and like biomechanics, which I really enjoyed. There was more, and you tell me what your thoughts are, but like I thought the first year was very much like setting a foundation of like a lot of the general principles that exist in footwear and fashion and apparel. And then our second year was much more focused. It was a little bit more like choose your own adventure, in the sense of like, we'll have some more studio-based courses, but a lot of what I really enjoyed about the program is you could kind of choose the topic of your projects to kind of tailor for your own interests and like where you thought you wanted to be post grad. So specifically that'd be like more apparel, footwear, or equipment. And we were definitely empowered near the end of the first year, but certainly the second year and almost in its entirety, to kind of choose your own path as far as what you want to work on. So, I thought I learned a ton in those foundational courses in the first year, which again, like I was definitely very insecure and like definitely imposter syndrome of like, oh my gosh, like Doug is throwing out these amazing sketches of, shoes, and like Emily and Gabby are making these like factory level apparel garments, which shout out Emily again and our friend Gabby Lorenzo Rudd, who are just like incredibly disciplined and like incredibly focused and, hardworking at their making skills. So, but getting into the second year, like I felt a little bit more like I knew what I was sort of doing, and focused primarily on footwear for the second year. And for the most of the second year, as I'm sure maybe your people know, is you work on your thesis project, which is again more of a self-briefed project in one of those 3 lanes of footwear, apparel, equipment, and most of the year working on it. So that was really awesome. I felt like getting like a long time to work on a project that was it hopefully should be a passion project for you, if that's your decision to choose your topic. Like getting to spend that long was a blessing and a curse, as I'm sure you remember. But it was awesome. I think overall, like looking back, I've actually had this conversation with some people of like, would you do it again? And I feel like for me, it was like I didn't have the skills or the experience or the knowledge to do what I'm doing now before entering this program. So for me, it was like a means to an end of like, if I wanted to get here, I had to go through this. And while maybe I don't think it necessarily had to be as stressful as maybe it was at some points, I'm incredibly thankful for it. So
totally. Who would you I'm trying to like word this question the most like politically appropriate. I'm not just kidding. But who would you recommend the program for? If you say there's like a swath of, and I'm like, I don't know if you've talked to different people, and like when someone asks, and obviously, I mean, that was a pretty like glowing recommendation from your end. Like, what would, who would you recommend to the program?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think especially looking back now, having worked in footwear specifically, because I will say I think it's a little bit of a different game with apparel and equipment. I think some of the same principles still apply, certainly. But for footwear, I think I'll answer that in a couple different ways. I think what's interesting is similar to entrance to the program, there's not one area of study or one right way to do things. There wasn't one major to have a bachelor's and to get into our program. I think there's similarly not like a very straightforward way to get into footwear. I know people that have gotten hired off of Instagram because they post their sketches on Instagram and they like, they look so beautiful and amazing that like companies will be like, hey, this person's talented. So unlike many careers, there's not this like certain threshold of education or whatever that you have to reach in order to like start applying to jobs and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think for those who already feel like maybe they have a degree in industrial design or they have a lot of experience and are incredibly talented in, ideating and concepting and sketching, like maybe you don't need it. Like, just to be honest, like I was not one of those people because I didn't have the experience or those skills sharpened at all. Like, I didn't spend the previous 4 years of my life, preparing for that. But like there are some people, who I work with who their first job out of college is at Nike. And like, they studied industrial design or, fashion or graphic design or, what have you. But it's just the skills they have and the work that they're able to present in a portfolio. They can do it, right? So like I think to get it around to your question, I think the program is great for people who maybe have an interest in footwear and fashion, feel like they're on the right track or they're very interested, but they want to learn the skills or at least like get more of a formal education as far as like some of the broad things that you would do in one of these jobs. And to be fair, it's not all inclusive, right? There are many things that like you can't be taught in a classroom that you will learn on a job. Yeah. But I think broad strokes, like I didn't know what a tech pack was. I didn't know what 3D modeling, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of those things I think that you would learn in the program that are incredibly helpful for someone like myself who was interested in the industry, but didn't have like a strong design perspective or education that I thought maybe I would get a job without going. So right. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think, yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I think even like myself being someone who did an undergrad in outdoor product design and like a product design focused undergrad, it was still helpful to like sharpen some of those tools to do deeper projects than you'd get on an undergrad level. And
yeah,
I don't know, just like continue to have the opportunity to learn, especially during a time that we were there in like the heat of COVID, when like job markets were so
nobody was hiring. Yeah, nobody was hiring.
Like nothing was going on.
I guess another thing that you just reminded me, like I think something too that the graduate program specifically, and maybe this is true in other undergrad programs, but I felt like there was such a high expectation for us, like coming from people who had worked in the industry who were involved in the program, like to kind of go up, what you said, like it's not like it was just a 1 or 2 week school project that like you got an A for, turning something in. It was like very highly scrutinized. And like, I think that's maybe kind of what I've been intimating at that was very challenging for me at some points was like, I tried so hard to like, put in the hours and like work on things that like, at the end of the day, like wasn't that great. And someone, in one case in particular, I'd worked for like a couple weeks on a project and it was like a day or two before it was due. And one of our professors came by and said, this looks terrible. Like start over, like 2 days before we had to present it at a critique. And it was incredibly challenging, but silver lining, right? I feel like that was while incredibly difficult, set the standard for like, well, in a job, like no one's going to care if like you stayed up all night and it still looks bad. Like, yeah. So there were incredibly high standards, which I think were challenging, but in a more professional sense, right? It's like, oh, there's a bigger push, and maybe it's changed a little bit now, but at the time we were pushed incredibly hard to like have the highest quality, like professional level work, which I think, stands out as opposed to maybe like more of a school project that is on a shorter timeline. So, yeah.
You could say there were literal like blood, sweat, and tears that were shed throughout the 2 years from probably most people in the program.
Yeah. Yes, quite literally. And I'll do a plug. You should, if and when you have Gabby on, ask her about the blood part.
Okay. I'm gonna
if you remember her injury near the end of our time.
I'm trying to. Oh yes, I actually did. I think that'd be a good.
And she's fine. She's fine. So nobody worries. She's fine. Looking back now, it's just a crazy experience.
For sure. Gabby may or may not be on the schedule for next week. So.
Amazing.
Good times. Okay, so you finished at the University of Oregon. And this is, I guess, something like, well, I mean, this is the next step in what we're talking about. But like, so you got to Crocs. How'd you get there? Like, what was did you know anyone? Was like, we can like reference back to networking. Like, was it your portfolio? Did they love your smile? Like, what was what's the like red thread between graduating with a master's and landing job one?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think honestly that's the like probably the unspoken part. Like that's the hardest part is right. You know, even if you go to a program like this or you get a bachelor's in design, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to just get a job. You know, like which is hard and like very different from like a science like you know PT or nursing, right? Like which again incredibly thankful for, but more of a straightforward path. For me, and honestly, Doug, like I would say this even if we weren't talking on this podcast, but like you were already a great example of this in school. Like it's connecting with people and like you know it's honestly it's a pretty small world like in the footwear world, you know. So like I think the red thread is like putting yourself out there and like trying to just like get your name out there so people remember you, and similarly like making sure your work is the best representation of you as it can be. So like for me, I had moved to Colorado. I didn't have a job actually at the time, but my lease was running out in Portland, and I was like, I can apply to jobs from anywhere, and I really love Colorado. So I was working at a coffee shop in Colorado, applying to a bunch of jobs, and COVID was sort of loosening up at the time, and so there were more jobs being posted. And I actually had made a friend who had a friend of a friend who worked at Crocs and as a footwear designer. And similar, you know, kind of what we've been saying, like I just reached out, or I was like, hey, like, would you mind like putting in a word for me or like whatever? And so I remember he and I connected on LinkedIn, and I was like, hey man, I would just love like if you had like 30 minutes, if I could just jump on a quick call and like show you my portfolio and like just tell me where I can be better, or like if I'm applying to a job, because they had posted footwear design jobs, like what can I do to like, you know, try to make this happen. And he was super awesome. His name is Alexander Mayhew. Shout out Air Maze. Look him up on Instagram at Air Maze. But, you know, he was nice enough to meet with me, and I, you know, went over my portfolio, and he was very, very kind, but also very honest with me about some things that maybe weren't the best, or like things he would tweak to show this or that, right? And so, but then when I then applied to jobs, you know, he was nice enough to, I'm pretty sure, maybe I'll have to ask him. I think he asked, you know, or he mentioned my name to some people, and I got a couple interviews. And that was huge. Like you know, I had applied to probably, I'm sure you can relate, like not trying to exaggerate, but probably over 150 jobs at least,
Yeah.
all over the country in footwear design at that point. Didn't hear back from a single one. Not one. And it's not like, oh, like, hey, thanks for applying, no thank you. Like, not even anything. And so it was pretty rough, right? You're like, oh man, like, did I just spend these 2 years like grinding, and like, what's going to happen? So I ended up getting this interview, and actually I had like 6 interviews for this first position, and then didn't get it. And I was like, just crushed, because it was over the course of like a month or more. And I was so bummed. And then about a week after I was told I didn't get the role, I saw they posted another role in footwear color design. And I was like, oh, okay, like I think I know what that is. And so sent my friend Alexander a message, applied again, got another interview, interviewed another like 5 times, which with a few of the same people actually, which I was kind of like, oh, don't you remember me? But yeah, then landed the role. Which was super exciting. Again, I was living in Colorado. Crocs is located in Colorado, which was convenient. I think maybe partly to my advantage that I was already there. But yeah, so that's kind of how that happened, which I think is a testament to just getting on calls with people, reaching out. And I think especially as, you know, if you're a student who's watching this, you know, or someone who's up and coming, like, I think there's sort of a culture, and I hope you agree. Like, I think there's a culture in the industry of like paying it forward. Like, yeah. I had so many calls that I, you know, was on with people just chatting, similar to how we're doing about like what we're excited about, you know, what our dreams are, and those people I would talk to would say they did the same thing with people, and like that's, you know, super valuable. And like I had a couple people almost point blank ask me, like, just pay it forward. Like, if you make it someday, like, do the same thing. So I think the red thread was not giving up, talking to people and like shooting your shot, as I know you like to say, with people. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's how I got there. So it was a long time, but it was good.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's where whenever people ask me, I guess my recommendation on the master's program, I always say like, nothing's guaranteed, like if like it's not like like I have friends that studied accounting and then companies just came and like hired everyone that they graduated with,
Yeah.
And it's or my brother was a lawyer and he did a summer internship and had a job offer before like the last year of law school started, I think. If I remember.
I mean,
it's just like there is, like you said, I don't know, I guess, how competitive all other fields are. I think getting a good job everywhere isn't always the easiest thing, but it's extremely competitive. And what I like to say to people that, like, people like to hire people that they like, because it's like you work with people, and you also want to know that they can do the job.
Well, totally.
Or at least like have the ability to, with some of the skills, and then things can always be and should always be learned in the job as well. But I think like all the effort that you went through in networking in the end, like, helped you out, right?
I totally, I would agree. And I think something that reminded me of too, Doug, is I remember when we were in school, you and myself and Gabby and Emily, like, I remember we would at least try to ask like really good questions of people who we were speaking with that were adjunct professors or guest speakers. Yeah. And I remember like very clearly, like, people, always ask sort of that around the same way, like, how do you get a job here? How do you get hired? Or like, what are the traits of somebody you want to work with? Right. And it sounds very simple, but I remember at least 2 or 3 times people that were asked that question and stuff, like, just be nice to work with, like, carry yourself with like a kind demeanor and like be open and be a good teammate. Like that's, and I remember people, I'm thinking like, that's what they're saying. Like, they're not like, oh, be a killer 3D modeler. Like, so to your point, I think shooting your shot, but also like having the demeanor and the mindset of like, you want to be a good teammate and being open and like being humble, like, I think goes a long way. Right. So yeah, be curious.
I would wager a bet that in all of your successful networking, you've never said to somebody like, give me a job, Yeah,
no, that's a little bit of a faux pas. I don't think you should do that.
Yeah, that's not networking. That's not like creating a good connection, and that no one wants to help you in that situation. At least not as much as they want to help a friend in a similar situation.
Right. But I think a lot of that too, and like last thing I'll say about that is like, I think it's important when you are connecting with people, like, to really be yourself. Because like, if you're kind of putting on this like charade of like what you think someone should act like at a Nike or at a Landed Footwear or wherever, right? Then it's like, I think a lot of times people who you're talking to are smart enough to see that. But also, like, if you were to get in there, like, then you're going to be putting on kind of this show every day. And I think it's so important when you're in a creative role to like have your own unique, authentic perspective. So I think meeting with people, but like being yourself and being kind, and I think that's the name of the game. And that'll hopefully, if it all works out, like, will lead you to a place where you're working with people who are stoked to be with you. Yeah. So
that's a good point. When I was applying to Black Diamond, I made it very clear, one, that I had only climbed like a couple times in my life, and 2, that I had only skied at a ski resort one time also, because it's like everyone was into like, Black Diamond's like climbing and skiing.
They're intense.
And like legit, like, if you couldn't talk the talk, like people knew. So it's like, you don't want to go into a job as a poser, But
I think also, like, similarly, like, I think, just because you're not a pro athlete or a pro climber, like doesn't mean you can't, be an excellent designer and like creative employee somewhere. So I would say that as well. Like the category I work in right now, like I have little to no interest in this sport. I don't play it. I'm not good at it. But like it's really fun to work on. And I think actually that's what can be a benefit sometimes where you're like, hey, I don't know what's been done, or I don't know, like, I mean, I think there's you should do your homework, but like it's almost good to bring your unique perspective and be proud of it, because like I think that's really fresh for a lot of places. So
I agree. And that's what they even said to me when I said that
yeah,
wasn't
it's really valuable.
Hardcore athlete. But okay, so I guess we've already said that now you're at Nike. Hit us with so you're at Crocs. Hit us with like your one Crocs highlight. Like I don't know if there's one or if you have two or something, and then what the shift was to where you're at now, like what you went through.
Yeah, I mean, big highlight for me is just like the creative people that I got to work with. Like, and I think thankfully, I'm still connected with a lot of those people. So like, I mean, sentimental like highlight is like meeting Alexander and my friends like Caroline and Nick and other people like that did a lot of the work. We were all kind of on the same level, more or less, like working on the product, and like we were so passionate. Like I think that was a huge highlight, just being around creative people. But I guess project wise, highlight for me, I have some mixed feelings about it, but working with Salehi Bembury, big fashion partner for Crocs, like within like 9 months of me getting hired, like I was like in the room with him and his team, like working on stuff, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And like pretty, unique, but like, again, like sometimes, being unique and not having, all these expertise in certain areas is your superpower. So I was like, I didn't know any better. I thought this would be cool. Let's do it. Push some ideas, and like some of those ideas were adopted with like colorways and some materials and other things like that. And so that was really interesting. Like I'm really grateful. I don't think I would have gotten an opportunity like that so quickly, at a larger company. So like that was really awesome. So yeah, those are probably the people for sure. I think are certainly the highlight for me. But work wise, that was really cool.
Cool. I guess before we transition to your work now at the Swoosh, in Phil's house, what would you say were like, outside of like I guess like the networking was really important, but what were like the major skills that you did in your job that were like, this is something that had I learned it would have been like helpful, or what I learned that was helpful, if that makes sense. Yeah,
so both at Crocs and now at Nike, my job title is footwear color designer. So I make the colorways, which, it's a simple way of putting it. So I think there were some skills that were very helpful in our program that I learned. And I think a lot of it is conceptual, like how a shoe is made, right? And understanding the components, how they come together. And then in another way, kind of understanding the cost of, changing those pieces, whether that's be with color or changing the material. It's very helpful for me. Granted, at Crocs usually it was a little more of a simple build, but like I think that more foundational knowledge of how shoes are put together, how they're built. Essentially, I think maybe it was you or someone in school even said, like, imagine what you're asking a factory partner to do when you make a design decision, right? Like you can have a great idea or have an awesome sketch, but if it can't be made, or if it's going to be incredibly laborious to do that, then it's like probably not going to happen. Yeah. So I would say in school, those are like really big things that I learned. I think color is very unique in the sense of, in one way, it's very subjective, right? Like I've heard a lot of times throughout my career in color, like it's just color. And, some people think that just, it doesn't take much skill or expertise to do. But I think it's not as simple as like you look at one shoe and what looks the best. For me, it's become much more of a strategy type, more like cerebral type design, where you have to think about, okay, well, we have 30 shoes that are coming in and they're being placed in these distributions of, our broad distributions, more energy accounts. It becomes more of a, okay, this color is exclusive and it would be right for this consumer, so we're going to put it here. And so it becomes more of a puzzle in that way. And I don't think I could have, there's nothing that really could have prepared me for that, I don't think, in school, because it's just so business driven and strategy, that's like just very unique. So I think the skills I learned on the job that I still now do is actually one that I think, we sort of talked about in school, but not as much. I think being able to understand different consumer types and like have an understanding of the market and like, especially if you're not the consumer, I think that's something I know you've learned and told other people is like, you can't just design for yourself because you'll have a really hard time because you're not the consumer for most products. So I think that was a huge skill that I learned is being able to take a step back and like understand, for example, like some of my favorite projects I worked on were kids product. And like, I'm not a kid, spoiler alert. I mean, I act like it sometimes, but we're
all a kid in heart, Brian.
Yeah, exactly. But I think skills including, being able to like empathize and understand with who from a business perspective, you want to buy this product, but also like what would be best for them from a design perspective is a big skill. Like, that I'm also now learning again in more of a performance sport category here. I'm like, I don't know much about this sport, but if I do research and look into like some of these people or network with people I know that are interested in some of these things, like what are they looking for? And I think those communication and like research and like understanding like, culturally, those kind of skills I think are super important, whether that's in color or just product design. So those are probably the biggest things.
Yeah. Hard skills, would you say like building presentations, Illustrator, Photoshop, like what are...
Yeah, hard skills, definitely making presentations and making them succinct. I think nothing's more challenging for an audience for when you like give them too much information at once, right? And then similarly, I think it's also to the detriment of the presenter if they're not paying attention to you while you're presenting. If there's too many exciting things or too many words, you lose people. So I think presentation, like you just said, I think is critical. But I think maybe more than that is like how you communicate verbally.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, like a job in design is like you're a storyteller and you're a communicator. Best of the best is when our work speaks for itself and people understand it, they get it. You don't even have to say anything. But most cases you will have to say something and explain it. So I think, and honestly, that's a huge part I even, forgot to mention before. Like in our grad program, we were presenting 2 or 3 times a week, if I like minimum, like, which honestly I think is a huge benefit for like getting into a job like this. Like I would be in rooms and would be more comfortable presenting even if you don't like it. Like you've done it so many times. Like people are like, oh wow, like you knew what you were, you presented well. Like I think that's huge. Even if
I agree.
Yeah. And I would say even, honestly, if I don't think I'm the best designer in some cases, or I don't have as much expertise or skills, if I can communicate my ideas, even if my sketch isn't the greatest or my presentation isn't, exactly clicking with people, if I can answer their questions or get my idea from my brain into their brain, like that's the biggest, I think, unlock for people. Like that's a huge superpower that I think people sort of know about, sort of don't. Because some designers are sort of notorious for like not being good communicators. Like they can draw things awesome, they can make these beautiful objects, but can't explain its relevance or how they did it. So I think if you can do that, that'll really set you apart. I don't know what you think about that, but that's what I think.
No, totally. I honestly think like one of, outside of like everything we did, whenever I talk about the program, like I think that like some of the most important things I learned were or gained from it were one, like friendships, like you said about your job at Crocs. Like I think that for me was like one of the biggest things, but yeah, that like being able to make a presentation, give a presentation, and talk through a presentation. No one ever outmatched like the beauty of a Brian presentation as far as like your graphic skills and everything. It was always
I don't know about that.
Immaculate. But yeah, I think being able to present is huge. The one thing that maybe people don't think about as much in design is that you are kind of like a salesman for your design, in the sense of like when you're pitching it to other people that are going to decide whether or not money is allocated towards your design. I mean, yeah, you have to be able to sell it and present well and get people excited. That's what that's what I love about design is like people want to be like like people want to feel like they're at a product company, want to feel like they're a part of like creating the product, even if they're not on like the design team. And so
Totally.
if you can get people excited through a presentation, then like money, literally.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to that kind of point of like understanding too. Like if you can understand what your business partner is like, hey, we're looking for a really commercial design that's going to like make the company a lot of money, but also solve this, and this problem. If you can, while you're making like understand that and like get into a meeting, like you said, where you can be like, hey, I heard you. This is what I know this is what you're looking for, and this is how I actioned it. Like people, like you said, love to be on that journey, and it is, in the best case scenario, a very collaborative situation. So I totally agree.
Right. All right, Brian, you're at Nike now. Um, what what's like your what's okay? So you got your first job. So many applications there. Like, what's your process in like moving over to a second job? Like starting at a new company, different like probably cultural things. Like, how do you find success in like in a new position at a new company?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That was like
I think,
four questions. But
yeah, no. I think candidly, like I'm pretty new at this job still. I just got this job started early November. Because the holidays have. Thank you so much. But then the holidays, and Lunar New Year have kind of stunted a little bit of how much actual work I've been doing. But I think things that I've been focusing on, trying, as a new hire, and things that I learned from my first job that, I'm now taking into my second job is I think, being someone that is open and, wants to learn, even if, because like I said, I'm working on a team with some people, this is their first job out of school. And like some people have been there at Nike 5 years and now they're, coming to join our team. So like for me, I want to show up and like be as still a learner and like have a learning mindset, but also like take what I've learned and like show people that I know how to do that and like help them as well. And I think at any job, like making good impressions on people is critical. But I think especially when you're a new hire, I think it's really awesome. You can set yourself apart by like going the extra mile and like setting one-on-ones with people, be like, hey, like I really want to get to know you because like this is important to me. So like I've been doing stuff like that, which has been fun.
That's awesome.
Even like throughout the organization, like obviously Nike is like the biggest, sport, company in the world. But like I think especially as a new hire in any job, I think people are really impressed, or like people are excited to talk to people who are excited to be there and who are new. So like I've been able to chat with people that are like on totally different teams and within the organization, and I think, I think also I will say like in a different way, like I think learnings I've taken from my previous job is I think companies will take as much as you'll give, and I think I mean that in a positive way, but it also can be kind of negative sometimes. Like I think some people, especially when you're creative and inherently, you tie a lot of your self-worth to your work. Yeah. It's really easy to kind of overinvest and, have a little bit less balance and be like, I'm so excited about this, and this, and you're putting in crazy hours. I think something that I'm also trying to be wary of is that, I love my job and I'm really thankful for it, but I also like, don't want to get out over my skis, a little too much early on.
I like it.
And I think that's really important too, so you're not spreading yourself too thin and you can do the best in your current role and, prioritize, again, your own human health. So, yeah, those have been some of the sort of things I've been thinking about the last couple months since I've been here. But it's been awesome so far. Really, really, really thankful.
That's awesome. Okay, I have one serious Nike question for you that I'm sure is going to get you flagged by all the PR people.
Okay.
No, I'm joking. I'm like the ultimate like I don't know if it's like dad jokes or just like dry humor, but I feel like when people don't know me, maybe they might be like, who is this guy? Like what's going on? But anyways,
you're like the nicest person on the planet. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, Brian, I lived 1 block away from Nike for 2 years, and while living in Oregon, I got into running a little bit, but at Nike, from what I understand, because I almost tried to go on the trail once and then I realized that it's blocked off. Have you, in your now 2 months that you've been there, have you ventured in, or not 2 months? I don't even. What month are we? January. 3 months.
Two and change, yeah.
There is so there's the Nike campus, and then south of Nike campus, there's like this wooded, like beautiful trail area that looks like it's an amazing place for people to go run. But from what I understand, you can only run there if you're a Nike employee.
I had not heard that. I
really?
similarly, I will say I've seen on my drive in, I have seen sort of this wooded area and people running through there.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I guess I didn't realize maybe it's only for Nike employees.
Oh, Brian, you're not gonna give me the deets, man.
I mean, honestly, that's no. This is good that you said this though, because one of my best friends is coming next week, and he's big into running, and I told him we would run around campus. So I'll get back to you as far as like if we go there to see if there's any like if I just scan my badge while I'm running. But
I would assume that if your friend is with you, then they'd be fine. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. As long as he's not wearing some sort of competitor footwear,
Yeah,
I think
it'll
be cool. But I know there is a running trail around the headquarters. Like I have walked on that a little bit.
Yeah.
But to your point, it probably does extend into that like other area. I'll have to check that out. I'm not 100% sure.
If it's legal, I need you to like take a time lapse video for me, just so I can like experience it from the external side. Okay, that's cool. All right, one other silly thing, just maybe not.
Nothing silly.
This isn't silly. This is serious. Brian, we know that you're from Michigan. Tell us about like your Detroit sport fandom. Like how are you doing? We know some sadness with the Detroit Lions, but the Pistons are awesome.
Hey,
where's your heart at? Break it down a little bit.
I mean, first of all, people can skip this part. You know, this is not going to be relevant for you unless you're also a struggling Detroit fan. But yeah, I mean, as you know, so I grew up in Michigan, big Michigan State University fan. So, you know, go green. They're having a good season for basketball. But as far as being a Detroit sports fan, it's been we've had a rough few years. I would say maybe a decade or more.
Couple decades, maybe.
Yeah, honestly, my entire life, no Detroit team. Actually, the '04 Pistons did win, but I was 7 at the time, so I don't really remember that. But my entire life, the Detroit professional sports scene has not been very successful, though they do have a history of championships in eras gone by. But to answer your question, it has been much more fun to be a Detroit fan the last few years. I am still incredibly sad about the Lions' divisional loss to the Washington Commanders, but am still excited about our future, even though now both of our coordinators have left and taken head coaching positions. I still think the bones are there. The roster is really solid. I trust Dan Campbell to make some good, well, hopefully good hires on either side of the ball. And so I don't think the Super Bowl window hasn't closed, but it's definitely gotten a little smaller. So excited for football there. But I know you're a big basketball guy. Shout out to the Jazz. In the pooper for Cooper.
Yeah, I was hoping actually that with you coming on the podcast, I know when we were living in Oregon together, the Detroit Pistons were in a similar situation to the Utah Jazz, and you got the number 1 pick with Cade Cunningham.
Hey, fade for Cade. That was our.
So I'm hoping that like all the good energy from this conversation just like seeps into the Utah Jazz as well. So
yeah, I mean, and my one quick note on the Pistons is, I think similarly to the Lions, I've spent 10, 15 years being like just disappointed in their lack of progression and just getting obliterated the one time they made the playoffs. Shout out Blake Griffin, by the way. But now it's looking like, Cade is healthy. They're starting to build more on the young nucleus. We got rid of Monty Williams, who clearly didn't want to be there. And it's like, that was a weird thing. I mean, he's still getting paid pretty well, so I think he's fine. But I'm excited about the Pistons. They're starting to put it together a little bit. Cade is him. Jaden Ivey, get well soon. But I mean, I would love for your Jazz to be a little better too, and maybe give us Lauri Markkanen at the end of the season. That'd be nice.
It could happen, man. Whoa, that would be really good for the Pistons.
I would love to see that space in the floor with him and Cade. But anyway,
interesting. Yeah. We could probably use Jaden Ivey though, so maybe there's not.
Well, we can talk later about that.
Okay. All right, Brian. Well, you are sitting we said, in the Nike chair. I'm positive there will be listeners in the recent present tense time. Maybe someone that watches this in like 5 years. You never know. Like, this is just going to be on the internet unless you ask me to take it down. Um, what's like, what's your, I guess, like, final words in the sense of like, here you are. You had this dream and these thoughts like growing up, and you obviously took like direct action to get to where you're at. Like, what would you tell someone that's interested in a similar career path to Brian Rottman?
Wow.
Maybe that was like too heavy.
No, that was a humbling question. I would say something that I'm really passionate about, and I know you are as well, is like, I think we feel very fortunate to have found something that we're really excited about, and that like that gets us out of bed every morning, and like it still is work, but to be paid to like work in footwear is like such a dream. And so I think I would say like lasting messages is like, try to find something that like, gets your fire going. And maybe it isn't footwear or like fashion, but like there's something that you care about, that like you are passionate about, want to learn about, want to grow, and you can, find a job doing it. Like, I think that is like my big takeaway, and something that I'm really, excited about, trying to talk with people that I know, like, that are in college. I'm like, what's your thing?
Yeah.
Like, if like, what are you super stoked about? Like, and then pursue it. So if, you're someone who's watching this, who's interested in footwear, like, what kind of footwear are you interested in? And like, why? And like, I wouldn't say like make yourself an expert on one area. I think it's good to have like a good, have lots of skills, but like, if there is something you're focused on, like, go for it, and like reach out to people and learn as much as you can, and keep knocking on doors, and see what happens. I think honestly, that go getter, like, you'd be surprised how many people like either don't know what they are interested in and don't really look for it, or know what they are interested in but don't really chase after it. So I think if you can do both of those things, like, you owe it to yourself to like try. And I think that was something that I'm really grateful for, is like, hey, I wasn't sure, but like I thought I was interested in, and I tried, and I remember thinking, I was like, hey, if this doesn't work out, at least I went for it. And like, I can look back and never be like, ah, man, like, I wish I would have at least tried to explore this. I think you owe it to yourself, and if you have the means, obviously I think that's a very privileged opinion to even be able to say that. But I think if there's something that you are that gets you out of bed, that's a dream of yours, and it's within reach, and you can do research on it and meet some people, like, do it, go for it. Like, the worst thing that could happen is they say no. So yeah,
I love it. As you were talking, Brian, I had this thought, and I wonder, like, have you, like, you put a lot of effort into getting to where you're at, right? Have you ever had a moment, and maybe like you're just waking up every day like knocking down shoe walls, metaphorically, but like, have you ever had the moment that like you worked so hard to get there that it was like, then you got there, like, let's say you're where you're at now or at Crocs, and you're like, not saying like it's not all it's cracked up to be, but it's like, have you ever had that like moment where you're like, you got there, but it's like, it's still a job? Has that been like it, or maybe like, I guess to say that, like, I feel like I put a lot of effort into like, like and energy and thought into like getting into this career, but I still had days where I was like, some of this kind of sucks. So like have you had that moment, or is it just like all been awesome?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think it's also important, and I think to your point, like, to piggyback off of that, like, I think it's really important to have balance in your life. Like, what your job is not who you are. And I think there are some people, in this industry who, like, God bless them, they're like so passionate, but like all they care about and all they live, eat, sleep, breathe is footwear. And like, it will serve them in their career, but I think for some of those people, they've sacrificed a lot of other things that are very fulfilling in life to do that. And so there are moments where I've been, yeah, this is definitely a job, and like it's not fun. It's political, and it can be incredibly challenging. But I think that's something I would also like, if there's one thing I could leave people with is like design isn't who we are, it's what we do. And like, I love doing it, and like it's great that it's a job, but like there's more to life and there's more to who you are as a person than whatever job you're doing. And that's true for anybody other than design, but I think it's easier for people in design maybe to get caught up in that because we're creating something, and then it's really hard to take our own worth, not attach it to our work. And so I think, yeah, there are days and there's times where like, yeah, this is a job and like it sucks, and it's not always fun. There's a reason you're paid to do it. But like, if you can find the balance of like, hey, I'm excited about this, I'm passionate about it, and it's fulfilling to me, while then being able to go home and like have a enriched life, like I think that's the dream job, is like enjoying your job and not having it be your life,
Totally. Beautiful. Okay, Brian, I think you left a nice trail of golden nuggets for anybody listening.
I hope so.
So, okay, well, thank you for coming on the podcast. I think one thing, like, congrats to where you're at. Congrats on the new job.
Thank you.
Congrats on life. It sounds like you've got a very like balanced approach, which I think sometimes it is hard to find balance, but I think like the search for it, or like I don't know. It sounds like you're doing great, and so that gets me stoked, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to be really excited to listen to this.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
But with that, I'm going to stop the recording. We can still talk for a little bit, but
okay.
For those listening, like it's about to end right now.